Hey everybody, this is Noah back for episode 24, I believe, of the Thought Bubble series. I guess as the intro summary of like things that have been happening. Work has been kind of boring. It's just kind of I think a nature of the industry that I'm in that like a lot of our work is like very contractual. And so what ends up happening a lot of the time is just that like if you don't have any contracts to work on, then like you just don't have anything to do. So I don't know if this is the case for anybody else, but when I don't have work to do and nothing's going on, I feel very like tired or like I feel more tired after days where I like do nothing comparatively to like days when I do have things to do. Maybe it's just cuz like I feel the time goes faster cuz I have something to focus on or like whatever it might be. I don't know. Maybe I'm just like a workaholic or something, but anyway, hopefully I get some more work soon. I know I will have some stuff soon, so hopefully those things come in and everything will be fine. I guess maybe the other thing, it is quite windy today. For some reason, as soon as I am able to record these videos, the wind starts kicking up. So apologies if you hear any wind or like blowing or whatever the hell is going on. Anyway, the topic of today's video, which you probably may have surmised by the title, I'm not sure what I titled these. I kind of just like will listen to it and then make the title as it is, like after listening to it. But basically, one thing that I wanted to think through or kind of talk about today is like my pessimistic nature to start. I feel like generally speaking, everyone tells you to like have a good mindset or like go in happy to everything, but I'm kind of like the opposite where like one, I think it's partially because like I'm a very big like overthinker. Like I'm very generally, I guess I don't know if like clinical is the right word, but like when I step into like a new room or a new situation or like even if it's like something small, like let's just say like a test, right, or something like that at school, where I'm sitting down at the test and I'm thinking about how poorly it can go for me. Like I'm just thinking about okay, like what questions might be on it, like if I get this, am I prepared? Like whatever. Like I'm just like going down this whole list of like okay, like what could happen basically when I'm going through this test. And so I'm like thinking, and I'm like okay, once I arrive to like whatever the worst scenario answer is, that's kind of like how like my brain perceives it, and it's like okay, like this is the lowest bar it can be, so that I can't really be let down. It's like it's like that whole like thing where like if you expect nothing, then like anything above nothing is better. You know, um, so I find myself like pretty much overthinking a lot of the time of when I'm entering, especially in new scenarios of like what's the worst thing that can happen and kind of like shutting down ideas of like I think the more concerning part is like also just like the idea that I'm like shutting down kind of like anytime that I'm like, oh, this could be this and like getting my hopes up because I feel like for some reason I just like have this natural tendency to just shoot it down a lot of the time, which is very much not good because what well like partially I think it's like if you always expect the worst, then like you kind of already go into things with a negative mindset. I think one thing that I always remember, especially in like competitions with like bowling, is like I think it was like a Jason Belmonte quote where he's kind of talking about like how no matter what, when he steps into like the alley and goes to compete, that he always believes that he's the best. Like no matter what, like even if it's like on a different day, like they could be the best in the world for like every other day, but at least on that day you're the best. And I think that's kind of like a really good mindset to have. But I feel like I've kind of had the opposite of like instead of imagining myself being the best at that day and like not having to be the best every day, but like instead of expecting like situations to go well for me, I feel like it's like just become like a reflex for me where I'm kind of just like shooting it down like it can't be that good. Like when I get my test back, for sure, like I'm worried, like I'm not immediately thinking like what like score did I get, like how high could it go? I'm immediately thinking how bad could it be. And so it kind of just leads to a lot of the time me having like a very like negative outlook on things. And I think the other part to like the first part, sorry, my like thoughts get jumbled very easily, but basically one of the other concerning parts in terms of my like pessimism other than me overthinking, I think a lot of the times is just like my first reflex for doing it. I kind of like mentioned it briefly, but like my genuine like first read on anything is always just like how bad can it be, or like this sucks, or like I don't really want to, like, like automatically like shut it down. Like new relationships too are opportunities. Like even when I'm meeting new people, a lot of times it's kind of just like what do they want from me, or like what do they need, and it's like it kind of sucks because I think like it leads to a lot of frustration for sure, where like a lot of times I have opportunities or things that I shut down because like I'm always thinking too pessimistically about them, where I'm like, um maybe it's like on the side of, oh, this person is too good, like what they're asking of me is too much, or like thinking that like, or like kind of being self-deprecating in a way of like just being like, oh, like I'm not good enough to do this, or like I have to like do whatever, you know what I mean, like just kind of like always like having my first reflex to be, it always kind of one, I'm gonna get hurt in some way, and like kind of putting up my like defense mechanisms and shields like immediately. And also it's kind of like on the sense of the self-deprecating part, which like could be worse almost in a way, where it's like, you're, instead of just like shutting yourself off, you're like putting yourself down. And a lot of the times, like I think I end up being like, oh, like I'm not good enough, or like I gotta work harder or whatever. But it's like I think part of it too is kind of like if you just always tell yourself that like you're not enough, or that like you can't do something, then like you kind of start to believe it, and then you kind of just like block yourself off from like a lot of opportunities. And so um I think it's kind of hard, it's a hard problem to diagnose, because through discussions with friends and other sources, like I think a lot of it has to do with how maybe I was raised. I think like throughout my childhood and like throughout my upbringing, I've had like a lot of times where like, you're just told that like you're not good enough, or like getting hurt in after putting your trust into people. And so like because of all of your past experiences, it kind of like manifests itself in like what this is now, where it's like, you're not as trusting of new or unknown situations. Like you're not as or like you're so much quicker to just being like, how can I fix myself, or like what can I do on my end to like meet somebody else's standard or something like that. And so like when you kind of just build up like this, like I think it's part defense mechanism, part like reflex. I think it's like a reflexive defense mechanism. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's like I kind of just built up this habit over time where I'm just like always putting myself down, or shutting myself off from a lot of opportunities. And I think what it leads to in the end is like a lot of times where I feel very, I don't know if like left behind or left out is the right word, but I think it's something along those lines. Now that I'm thinking about it. Yeah, it's like it's kind of like this fear of like, it's basically FOMO, you know what I mean? Of like fear of missing out, of like kind of looking back, if I had just like muster up the courage, or like shut down the ideas of like, oh, I'm not good enough, or I gotta work harder. Like if I actually just went out and did it and talked to the person, or like went up to the recruiter, like I think a lot of other doors could have been open for me, or like a lot of experiences that like now looking back, I'm like, wow, that would have been fun, but now it's kind of like too late. And I think you kind of get stuck in this like loop infinitely. It's like a negatively um what is it called, like it's a negative feedback loop, which is a thing that I learned about in college. But like it's kind of like you start at the top, where it's like you have like a new situation, unknown situation, right? Your first instinct is to be pessimistic, to put yourself down, to be like, I'm not good enough, I gotta work harder, like this person like is only out here for this, like whatever it might be, right? Whatever like defense mechanism you have, you throw it up immediately. And then you kind of like loop down to the bottom, which is then like you see other people kind of doing it, and you have like this like kind of like fear of like, or like this kind of like feeling of like missing out in your stomach. You're just like, dang, like it would have been so fun if I like ended up going on this trip with these guys, or like whatever it might be, right? And then you kind of loop back to like, okay, I'm gonna do it differently next time, and like here's all the stuff that I do. And then you don't actually end up implementing those steps. And like once you hit the like back at the top, right, when you have a new situation, like you can sometimes you can tell yourself all you want that like, try to think more positive, but like it's not really that easy. Especially if you have like a really really like long history, or like deep pattern of kind of being pessimistic, or like having that as your like natural reflex. And so that's something that I'm trying to like work on to be a bit better about. Because definitely I do get that feeling sometimes of like there's some, especially in like the industry I'm in, a lot of like, and I feel like it applies to like every industry too, of like a lot of it isn't necessarily what you know. Sometimes it's about who you know, and the ability to network and connect with new people and like make those connections are like really really like I think the big like currency value in industry. Like the way I got my internship was just like being like basically based on who I know, and then like also working hard. I mean, like don't get me wrong, like part of it is like you do have to have like a minimum barrier of entry, you know, like especially if you're doing like engineering, if you're doing med school, like there's a minimum level that you have to know to get in. But also at the same time, it's like it does help to have like connections to like people in the university, you know, that you're trying to apply to, people in industry. In my case, right, like I had a connection where I was able to talk to him, reach out, and then end up getting a full-time offer, you know. And I think like I miss out on a lot of those connections, and I'm sure other people who think the same way, of like always being pessimistic or kind of having that like anxiety to do those things, or always like thinking that it's going to be bad. Like I think, I don't know if like you guys feel the same way. I think everybody's experience is different, but at least for me, I end up feeling a lot of times like just like, dang, if I had the chance to talk to that person, because like sometimes those opportunities just don't come back. You know, like if you see somebody at like a company dinner or whatever it is, right? Like sometimes that person might retire. Sometimes that person might move on to a different industry. You know, they might move to the mainland, like continental U.S. You know, and so you kind of just get that feeling of missing out, and it like kind of sucks. So it's definitely something I'm trying to work on. One strategy that I did talk about recently that I think is super helpful is like realizing, kind of like imagining the inner child in you, you know, because like no matter what, no matter who you are, like whether you're like the 4-year old version of yourself, 15, 23, or whatever it might be, right? Like listening and like kind of looking at your inner self, because like all of those like years that have gone on is still you. And so one strategy that got mentioned to me that like kind of has like helped me try to move in a better direction is to like kind of sit there and like visualize like the inner child within you, right? Like your 5 6 year old self, 7 year old self, whatever it might be, right? Like whatever you imagine, and then kind of imagining what they're doing, you know, just like whether they're just kind of like chilling there, you know. Like for me, when I was doing this exercise, it was like me in a library reading a book at like 7 or something like that, right? And like seeing how he is, and then like kind of part of it I think like is interesting, because like at that point when I was that age, like I'm not worried about like overthinking, or like I'm not going into situations or classes or tests like worried about like what could go wrong. Like mini me is like just kind of chilling, you know what I mean? So imagining that kind of self, and then like part of it I think is like that kind of carefree whimsical kind of person is still like me, you know. It's still like a part of who I am, and that like I've kind of pushed it away, but it's still there, which is kind of like nice to know. But that's part of it I think, trying to like be like, you know, you were like this before, and like just because you locked it away or like pushed it away from yourself doesn't mean it's gone forever. And then I think the other thing is kind of like imagining like, okay, anytime that I'm being like self-deprecating, whether I'm like, you know, like I'm too stupid to do this, or like I'm not smart enough, or like I could be like whatever it might be, you know, like just always like the normal like self-deprecating things. Like whenever I think that way, like imagine telling that to like younger me, you know, and like how would mini me react to it? You know, I don't think like me from, what would it be, like 16 years ago, 17 years ago, like would take that very nicely, you know. I mean, nobody wants to hear that. And like imagining having that sort of like talk said to like especially a younger child is kind of like, dang, that sucks, you know. Like you don't want to say that to like a kid. So I'm trying to like implement it a bit more, and kind of imagine that scenario of like talking to myself like the younger me, because technically I am, you know, like the younger inner child is still there. But um yeah, definitely something that I'm trying to work on, just being like a little bit more open to new opportunities, not being like having my first reflex to be just to shut everything down, and like, you know, um get stuck in this cycle where I feel like I'm like missing out on things all the time. So definitely a thing to work on and hopefully get better at, because like, I think it opens you up to a lot of new opportunities, especially if you're not as like pessimistic and you're always like, it's kind of like a quote that I saw on like Reels or something, where it's like, if you can imagine the worst thing possible, you can also imagine like the best outcome possible for anything. So definitely something that I'm trying to work on and get better at. But let me know what you think if you're also pessimistic like me and trying to get better. I guess if that's pretty much it, like for everything that I wanted to say. But if you would like to hear my thoughts on any other subject, I'm gonna throw it on this side this time because in my normal setup. Up here is like a playlist, I think, of all the videos that I've made so far, and down here is probably like my channel thing. So please like, subscribe, comment if you like have any opinions. But thanks for watching again, and hopefully I'll see you in another video. See ya.